The watch has been passed, and she may now find eternal rest. Officer Chhateri Elise Payne, Shield 1588, end of watch code 8. The medical reality was grim. The trauma to her head had proven catastrophic. In an instant, the very foundation of her mother's existence seemed to fracture and dissolve. Authorities in Shreveport confirmed that Officer Chhateri Payne was ambushed and fatally wounded while departing for her evening shift. Commissioner Ben Raymond noted that she was a deeply respected member of the force, driven by a profound and noble sense of duty. As the forensic search for answers intensifies, the commissioner has issued a chilling warning to the individual responsible for this calculated violence. That evening, Chhateri donned her uniform and stepped away from the Midway Avenue residence she shared with Trayvon and their young daughter. She departed for her tour of duty fully equipped, her uniform crisp and her focus set, expecting nothing more than a routine night on patrol. Unknown to her, the perpetrators were already positioned in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 120 seconds before the silence was shattered, Trayvon messaged his cousin, Lawrence Pierre, with a single word: outside. It was the final signal. That brief communication sealed her fate. Chhateri walked through her front door and straight into a lethal trap she never saw coming. She was struck by multiple rounds, specifically in the lung and head. Trayvon then dialed 911, skillfully assuming the persona of a frantic, grieving partner. When the first responders arrived on the scene, he presented a carefully constructed narrative, claiming he was inside with the child when he heard the shots, supposedly returning fire at a dark, fleeing figure. He categorized the event as a random act of violence, feigning complete ignorance. However, even the most rehearsed scripts eventually show their seams. On the surface, his performance was quite effective, providing a plausible explanation for the immediate chaos. He offered a ready answer for every contradiction, meeting every investigator's inquiry with practiced composure. Yet, as detectives scrutinized his account, a sense of unease began to grow. The response was massive, involving 50 patrol units and over 10 deputies from Caddo Parish. The presence of both the mayor and the police chief underscored the gravity. The targeting of a uniformed official is never treated as a standard call. The entire community of Shreveport felt the weight of the tragedy as it rippled through the city. Chhateri was rushed into emergency care, and for a fleeting moment, there was a thin thread of hope for the family to grasp. A surgeon informed Litha that the thoracic injury was treatable, providing a temporary sense of relief in the midst of the crisis. She clung to that possibility with everything she had. Then came the devastating clarification. The cranial wound was irreversible. Litha recounted the moment her world collapsed in that hospital corridor, describing the experience with a haunting, lingering intensity. She still recalls the suffocating atmosphere, the scent of her daughter's perfume and hair products clashing with the metallic tang of blood, the imagery of the medical equipment, the chest tubes, and the visible trauma of the ballistics remain etched in her memory. She vividly remembers the specific injuries to her daughter's foot and the desperate, rhythmic data flashing across the medical monitors. Every detail of those life support readings and the surrounding environment is permanently burned into her consciousness. January 9, 2019, remains a date Lita Nash Hudson can never escape, marking the loss of her most trusted confidant. While people rarely equate children with best friends, their bond was inseparable, famously known to those close to them as Mama G and Chug. Whether called by her nickname or affectionate pet names, she was a daughter who was deeply cherished and perhaps a bit pampered. Long before Chhateri Payne considered a career in law enforcement, she found her voice through theater, vocal performance, and poetry. Few realized that her true aspiration was to enter the field of entertainment law. She possessed a strong desire to advocate for others, making her sudden shift toward the police academy a significant surprise to her family. Quite unexpectedly, she announced her application to the academy and her preparations for the civil service examinations. The revelation left Lita in a state of sheer disbelief. Soon, her daughter was immersed in the rigors of police training, yet they maintained their habit of speaking every single day. They were in constant contact, with Chhateri often sharing the immense physical and mental challenges she faced during her training. Upon her graduation, the two established a protective pact, a mandatory check-in after every roll call or shift briefing. Lita insisted on knowing exactly which sector her daughter would be patrolling throughout the night. Every break and the conclusion of every shift required a message of safety, a routine they honored until that final, tragic day. Lita had been about to call her daughter when she decided to check in with her husband, Terrell, for a brief moment instead. She had just finished her own professional duties, having completed her patient rounds and medication distributions for the day. That was when an unexpected communication arrived from Chhateri's partner, the man who would later emerge as a primary suspect. Lita was initially confused by the outreach, questioning why he would be contacting her so abruptly. It was during that call that she received the shattering news. He claimed her daughter had been targeted by a shooter. The grim reality: he had murdered her child. She informed her husband before rushing to the emergency room. Surgeons provided an update containing both hope and devastation. They noted a repairable gunshot wound to her lung. A fleeting sense of optimism quickly met a harsh reality. The medical prognosis then shifted darkly. The gunshot to the head was categorized as fatal. In that moment, her entire world simply collapsed. Sensory memories of that night remained vivid. A bizarre mixture of aromas filled the sterile air. Gucci Premier perfume mingled with the metallic scent of blood. She keeps her blood-stained uniform as a haunting memento. Refusing to part with the fabric, she begged for access. She pleaded for her daughter not to die alone. Now she is haunted by her daughter's final thoughts. She agonizes over her daughter's fear. Lacking peace, she fixates on not being there. Saving her child proved impossible. She had previously begged her daughter to come home. Her deep-seated distrust led to repeated pleas for separation. She wanted her daughter home. She claimed she wasn't scared. The watch ended for Officer Payne, badge 1588. Lita was left to navigate life without her daughter. Insomnia drove her to read every message she received. She scoured every letter and card seeking some connection. A young artist created specific tributes for the grieving mother. Tributes from across the nation now line her walls. Seeing her daughter's spirit resonate publicly provided some comfort. She remains deeply grateful for the community's collective kindness. 1 year later, the psychological weight remains heavy. Their connection was characterized by an intense emotional dependency. They had often joked about their inability to separate. Now she struggles to function in the daughter's absence. Her focus has shifted to her young granddaughter, Aubrey. She speaks to her daughter's memory about her exhaustion. Come get your child. The absence is felt most when caring for Aubrey. They spend time looking at photos of the mother. She acknowledges the widespread support from the local community. Contributions funded a permanent memorial at Forest West Cemetery. She preserves the blood-stained uniform as a sacred relic. At 10:17 that evening, 22-year-old Payne had served for only 2 months. Detectives began questioning the inconsistencies in Trayvon's narrative. Detectives secured a warrant for his mobile device. The digital history they uncovered was far from that of a grieving widower. In the days preceding the shooting, Trayvon had been making some very specific, chilling inquiries online. He researched insurance coverage for shootings and whether a gunshot to the limbs could prove fatal. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was a man running simulations, gauging the physics of a calculated attack. He was refining a blueprint, conducting the grim research typical of someone who is already committed to the act. Then, the investigators shifted their focus to his private text logs. Records show Trayvon had been in constant contact with his cousin, Lawrence Pierre, since the previous evening. This was no family chat. Pierre was acting as a spotter, monitoring Cherry's every movement and departure time. Trayvon was continuously verifying Pierre's proximity to the residence. They synchronized the operation perfectly. One word was signaled. 2 minutes later, the silence was shattered by gunfire. Detectives eventually determined that Trayvon had not orchestrated the execution in isolation. Pierre was on site, while a third man, Glenn Frierson, allegedly served as the getaway driver that night. The firearm was recovered, and forensic evidence firmly placed Pierre at the heart of the scene. Though Trayvon's fingerprints weren't on the weapon, his legal culpability in the conspiracy remained absolute. They had architected the plan together and would now face the consequences as a unit. Authorities believed Trayvon triggered the plot the second he realized Cherry was actually moving out. She had paid the deposit. Her keys were coming in 6 days. That reality was something he couldn't stomach. 1 week after the tragedy, the Shreveport Police and Caddo Parish Sheriff launched a multi-agency response. The Bossier Parish Sheriff assisted alongside the Louisiana State Police and federal ATF investigators. Chief W. Burton, alongside Councilman Bowman and Deputy Chief Gooden, announced 3 arrests during this somber briefing. At approximately 8:20 in the evening on January 9, 2019, Shreveport units responded to a 911 call on Midway Avenue regarding a female shooting victim. Moments later, responders found Officer Chhateri Payne in uniform, critically wounded and fighting for her life. Paramedics rushed Officer Payne to the Ashner Health Center for emergency treatment of her life-threatening injuries. Despite every medical intervention, Officer Payne succumbed to her wounds just hours after reaching the hospital. Every human life is sacred, and the act of murder is an unforgivable violation. But when a sworn protector is violently killed, the entire community feels the weight of that loss. It is often said that when an officer falls, the loss extends far beyond their department. The entire nation mourns. Today, those words resonate with a somber, undeniable truth. While many questions remain, Shreveport's elite detectives are pursuing the facts with a relentless, focused determination. They are currently operating around the clock to provide the answers this city demands. In this preliminary phase, investigators are not willing to rule out any possibilities. Every lead will be followed to identify and capture the cowards behind this brutal murder. A coalition of numerous law enforcement and public safety agencies has joined this effort. The teams have toiled through the night and will not rest until justice is served. Officer Chhateri Payne joined the force on July 27, 2018 in Academy Class 79. She was admired by her peers, showing a clear, innate drive to serve the public. Officer Payne officially graduated from the Academy on November 16, 2018. The chief personally handed her the diploma as she crossed the stage to join the ranks. He saw the excitement in her eyes as she began her mission of serving others. She embraced a higher calling, swearing a solemn oath to the citizens of Shreveport. The murder of an officer is a catastrophic trauma for any agency, and this department is no different. However, the leadership assured that their focus would not waver. They would not fail. The department pledged to honor its duty to Shreveport and the brave souls wearing the badge daily. While grieving Payne's brutal end, the force committed to the professional standards the public rightfully demands. Every agency asset was mobilized, aggressively pursuing every lead to ensure the killer faced justice. Authorities urged anyone with information helpful to the ongoing investigation to contact the police immediately. Dial 6737C7373. Submit anonymous tips via www.lockup.org. The chief offered prayers to Payne's kin, assuring them the department now stood as their family. Accompanied by Mayor Perkins, the official prepared to field inquiries about the shooting. Reporters inquired if the officer's 2-year-old was present and whether the toddler witnessed the violence. The young child was found at the crime scene. Officials remained uncertain about what the minor saw or if domestic strife sparked the tragedy. Multidisciplinary teams from various local and regional agencies were currently scouring the site for physical evidence. The exact motive behind the cold-blooded killing remained elusive during the early stages of the probe. Had any descriptions of the shooter surfaced yet? Preliminary details on a person of interest existed, though nothing was officially confirmed. The department continued to solicit any information that might help identify the perpetrator. Someone was previously brought in. Did they remain behind bars for the time being? A witness present at the site was interviewed, but subsequently released from police custody. No new arrests were reported, nor were specific suspect descriptions ready for release. Information would only be shared once investigators felt fully confident in its absolute accuracy. Current data remained too fragmented for the chief to provide a definitive public update. Reports suggested she was beginning her shift. Was she wearing her formal patrol attire? She was fully dressed in her official police gear, ready to start her routine patrol duties. Outdoors. Ownership of the residence where the shooting occurred remained under investigation. Suspect details were withheld as the chief reflected on the fallen officer's background. Colleagues from her academy class gathered at the hospital, devastated by the loss of their peer. Despite a lack of personal acquaintance, her reputation for professional excellence was widely recognized. Described as sharp and dedicated, peers believed she had truly found her calling. Her passion for service made her irreplaceable, leaving a void felt deeply by the force. Moving forward would prove a monumental challenge for the grieving department. Reports of multiple headshots circulated, though forensic confirmation remained pending. While multiple shots were fired, the exact location of her wounds was not yet public. Inquiries were made into her athletic past and academic history. The chief could not substantiate those specific biographical claims. Public information officers would provide updates as the forensic investigation yielded results. Should actionable intelligence on the shooter emerge, the department promised to notify the public immediately. There was no evidence she fired back, despite lingering questions about the initial reports. Scant evidence at the scene made it nearly impossible to reconstruct the final moments. The investigation was complicated by another shooting occurring nearly simultaneously. Reporters wondered if the second incident stretched police resources too thin. It did not, thanks to an overwhelming surge of support from the community. Neighboring jurisdictions reached out immediately to offer their full cooperation. Regional and federal partners pledged their manpower to assist in the manhunt. Troopers and deputies stood ready, ensuring sufficient boots on the ground to process the scene. The administration remained vigilant, responding to the escalating events that had recently paralyzed the city. The investigation turned to the message he intended for the public to hear. He vowed an aggressive, unrelenting investigation, pledging to exhaust every possible resource until the case reached its final resolution. When asked about external support, the confirmation of incoming assistance was immediate. Numerous external agencies had stepped forward, a list too extensive to name without risking an omission. Every law enforcement branch in Northwest Louisiana had pledged their full support to the cause. He declined to provide any confirmation. The city's leadership faced a brutal start, struggling to maintain order after a series of violent incidents. The primary concern remained the long-term objective moving forward. Policy revisions were already underway to reshape how the city was policed. He called for collective reflection and a deeper look into the social fabrics of their own circles. The search for the psychological roots of the city's ongoing suffering had begun. He maintained that morality cannot be dictated through the stroke of a legislative pen. The community would have to find internal resolve and face these systemic fractures together. On the front lines, the mayor and Chief Raymond worked tirelessly to ensure justice caught up with the perpetrators. The conversation turned to the visceral experience of standing at the active crime scene. A brief pause followed. A military past had familiarized him with tragedy, yet each new loss remained uniquely haunting. It was a somber night, the weight of the tragedy etched clearly onto the faces of the responders. The fire department also worked through the heaviness of that dark night. Chief Raymond noted the impossibility of replacing a fallen officer who had meant so much. The fallen officer's stellar reputation within the ranks only deepened the communal sense of grief. Her death marked a profound void within the Shreveport Police Department and the city itself. He addressed the concerns of the younger, shaken officers. He sought to remind them why they originally chose the path of the uniform. While a time for grief, it served as a grim reminder of the darkness they were sworn to fight. He paused for a moment. He hoped this tragedy would sharpen their resolve to shield the citizens of Shreveport from harm. He was asked to address the residents of the city directly. He insisted that healing required the community to examine the core of their systemic issues. Simply changing police procedures would not be enough to fix the problem. The moment demanded that the city unite under the crushing weight of their shared mourning. He urged everyone to hold Officer Payne's family in their thoughts as they moved toward the future. This crisis belonged neither to the mayor nor the police alone. It was Shreveport's collective burden. Only through unified action could the city hope to overcome this dark chapter together. Questions arose regarding extended shifts for the officers during the ongoing probe. He deferred specific tactical and operational inquiries to the expertise of Chief Raymond. The press wondered if the mayor intended to be present at every future crime scene. He confirmed his presence at every scene as long as he remained within city limits. On the 29th, he and Chief Raymond established a protocol for his direct involvement in violent crime responses. Unless he was away promoting the city, he promised to be on the ground during crises. One major priority was ensuring the officers received fair compensation for their dangerous profession. Plans were in motion to adjust pay scales, preventing a brain drain to neighboring departments. He acknowledged the importance of the question. Council members, including Grayson Busher, had already brought the matter to the floor. Officials are currently scrutinizing the municipal budget to ensure law enforcement personnel receive competitive compensation and to curb further departures from the force. Furthermore, tragedies of this magnitude reinforce a collective resolve within the community and a somber gratitude for those serving the city of Shreveport. Logistics are currently being finalized. The fallen officer has been moved to a mortuary, and a formal meeting with the grieving family is scheduled for later today. Investigators are granting the relatives the necessary solitude to process their initial shock. Senior leadership remains in constant contact with the kin, promising unwavering support as they navigate this nightmare. The department prepares to bid farewell with the full ceremonial honors befitting a hero's sacrifice. This tribute will proceed exactly as the family dictates, respecting their every wish. Indeed, while the investigation remains in its infancy, the workload ahead is staggering. Authorities pledged to provide updates as new leads emerge and the situation evolves. A final inquiry came from the gallery. With the perpetrator still unidentified and on the run, the question of whether they remained armed and volatile hung in the air. Absent a definitive identification, police were forced to operate under the chilling assumption that multiple armed threats might still be roaming the streets. Detection efforts continued with an aggressive, around-the-clock intensity to secure a resolution. That concluded the briefing. 26-year-old Trayvon Anderson, the father of Chhateri child, stood accused alongside 22-year-old Lawrence Pierre. Pierre, Anderson's cousin, held a surprising position as a deputy clerk within the Caddo juvenile court system at the time of the slaying. Joining them was Glenn Frierson, a 38-year-old barber. All three faced charges of second-degree murder. A cloud of skepticism soon gathered over the charges. If the assassination was this meticulously planned, why wasn't it first degree? Digital footprints told a story of cold-blooded coordination. From incriminating text threads to calculated internet searches and signal logs, the state's strategy hinged entirely on the killer's psychological driver, the motive. Prosecutors argued that Anderson didn't set out to kill a cop. He set out to execute a woman who dared to leave him. Her police blues were incidental, merely what she happened to be wearing when she crossed the threshold for the last time. He was fueled by rage over her escape plan, specifically an apartment deposit that made her departure a physical reality. This was not an assault on the badge, but a final, violent act of domestic possession against a woman he refused to release. The district attorney framed the case as a story of a partner who turned lethal the moment his grip on her began to slip. Legally, the distinction mattered little for the sentencing guidelines. A second-degree conviction still ensured a lifetime behind bars. Yet, for many observers, the legal nuance felt like a hollow compromise. Critics pointed to the level of surveillance and the precise timing of the ambush as evidence of a much darker, premeditated intent. To them, the data extracted from those devices suggested a crime far more calculated than the official charges implied. The controversy lingered long after the courtroom doors opened in April 2022. On the eve of the trial, Pierre opted for a plea deal, accepting a sentence of life imprisonment. When summoned to testify against his co-defendants, Pierre remained stone-faced, invoking a wall of silence for every question posed. Denied his live testimony, the jury instead watched his recorded confession before deliberating for a mere 2 hours. The verdict was swift. Trayvon Anderson was found guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy. Conversely, Glenn Frierson walked free. The jury found the evidence of his knowing involvement too thin for a conviction. Judge John D. Mosley Jr. handed down a sentence of life without the possibility of release for Anderson. An additional 30-year term was added for the conspiracy, mandated to be served consecutively. Before the gavel fell, the victim's mother, Letha, addressed the court in a moment of searing grief. She spoke of a family shattered beyond repair, distinguishing between the public servant, Officer Payne, and her beloved daughter, Lisa. The loss felt like a profound injustice, a daily void where a vibrant life once flourished. She confessed to still reaching for her phone to call her daughter, only to be met by the cold reality of permanent silence. Shreveport turned out in droves to honor Chhateri, with lines of mourning strangers stretching for blocks. The community gathered to commemorate the life of Chhateri Elise, known more intimately as Lisa Payne. Her story began on June 30th, 1996. The sun vanished on January 9th, 2019, as the promise of resurrection was whispered. A belief was shared that life persists even after the heart stops beating. On Saturday, January 19th, 2019, the community met at Summer Grove Baptist. They gathered to mark a final transition, a ceremony for a soul going home. Ulysses Reed presided over the service, a figure of authority in a room full of grief. The goal was to honor the divine while supporting a family standing at the edge of despair. The sanctuary was described as a fortress against the encroaching darkness. Strength was sought from above, while the ritual followed its cold, printed schedule. Any changes to the order would originate solely from the man at the pulpit. With a solemn word, he turned to the ancient scriptures of the two testaments. From the 23rd Psalm, he spoke of a shepherd guiding his flock to green fields. It described a path toward quiet waters where a weary soul might find restoration. Even in the deepest shadows of death, the text promised that divine protection would remain. A table was set in the presence of enemies, anointing the head with oil until the cup overflowed. The passage concluded with the assurance of a permanent home within the divine house. That completed the reading from the old scrolls of the 23rd Psalm. Shifting to the 14th chapter of John, the speaker urged the grieving to find peace. He mentioned a father's house with many rooms, a claim he presented as absolute truth. A promise was made to prepare a place, ensuring that the lost and living would reunite. The destination was supposedly known to all, a familiar path for the faithful. When Thomas questioned the way, the answer was clear. The path was the person himself. He finished reading the 14th chapter of John, the exclusive gate to the Father. He hoped these ancient words would provide a psychological anchor for the suffering family. He then invited the congregation to join him in a moment of prayer. There was a stark confession. Some tragedies simply lie beyond human comprehension. This was one such moment, yet they chose to lean into a desperate, blind trust. They gave thanks for the deity and the perceived power of the Holy Spirit. This Spirit remained their sole source of strength. A plea was made for the forgiveness of human errors and failings. Despite the intense pain and tears, the narrative remained one of forced gratitude. The focus then moved to the life and the enduring legacy of Officer Payne. The prayer turned to her mother, who was now grappling with a profound void. It included her daughter and siblings, seeking a peace that would guard their broken hearts. It was acknowledged that a long, difficult journey lay ahead for the family. Yet, they placed their certainty in a higher power that they believed remained faithful. A petition was offered for Pastor Reed, seeking the strength to carry the sermon. He asked to be shielded from himself, serving only as a vessel for a higher glory. The prayer expanded to Shreveport and Bossier City, including Mayor Perkins and law enforcement. A thought was offered for every officer who puts on a badge each day. He requested that unseen guardians be assigned to protect them on their watch. Devotion was declared, framed as a response to a love that existed before them. They looked toward a future dawn, when the current shadows would finally dissipate. Final thanks were given for salvation and the mercy extended to the living. The prayer was sealed in the name of the one they called the Christ. A final, solemn affirmation concluded the rite. Whether it was her innate vitality or their shared history at Captain Shreve, Officer Chhateri Payne possessed a magnetic quality. A distinct pull existed between them, rooted in the disciplined world of high school athletics. Their initial meeting took place that November during the formal ceremony of her police academy graduation. Even a casual observer could see the raw conviction written across her face as she celebrated. Her visible enthusiasm suggested she had finally reconciled her identity with her professional calling. Weeks later, inside an elevator at the Independence Bowl, her identity as an athlete surfaced once more. It became clear that the competitive drive of the track was etched into her very soul. She spoke of her Uncle Brandon's sprinting days, leaving the question of family dominance playfully unanswered. Yet, the most haunting aspect of that encounter was the final sentiment she chose to share. She expressed a profound, simple devotion to her role as a protector within the community. Those two brief interactions have since become significant markers of a life interrupted. On January 9th, Shreveport did not merely lose an officer. A vital source of light was extinguished. While the city mourns, the true depth of this tragedy rests with 2-year-old Aubrey, now without a mother. That child began her mourning in a world forever altered by a sudden, violent absence. Her mother was taken by a senseless and brutal manifestation of street violence. The city stands in silent solidarity with her parents, Lita and Terrell, and the entire grieving family. Within the halls of the police department, the weight of this loss is felt with clinical intensity. The presence of neighboring law enforcement agencies provides a cold, necessary comfort to the local community. There is a collective hope that her legacy will inspire a renewed dedication to communal service. The objective remains to ensure her ultimate sacrifice does not fade into a mere statistic. Leadership has issued a stern call to end the cycle of violence that claimed their guardian. A formal city proclamation now serves as a permanent record of Officer Payne's contribution and character. Born in late June 1996, she entered the police force in July of 2018. Throughout her tenure, Officer Payne operated as a faithful shield for the city's residents and their property. She emerged from Academy Class 79 on November 16, 2018, alongside 23 fellow recruits. To her peers, she was more than a colleague. She was a steadfast ally in the field. She served with a quiet, professional pride among the ranks of the city's uniformed guardians. Driven by a heart for service, she displayed an unwavering commitment to the rigors of her vocation. Shreveport vows to preserve the memory of her courage and her honorable example of service. A profound sadness permeates the air today as prayers are offered for her inner circle. Consequently, the city administration moves to formalize this moment of transition. Mayor Adrian D. Perkins officially decrees this day as a tribute to the life of Officer Chhateri Payne. Citizens are encouraged to approach their lives with the same hope that defined her brief career. This official act is signed and sealed under the authority of the Shreveport municipality. A final expression of gratitude is extended to the assembly. The morning began with a somber address to the family and the gathered dignitaries. Officers and citizens alike stood together to analyze the impact of a life cut short. For a chief of police, the notification of a fallen officer is the most devastating psychological blow. Those in the profession rarely allow themselves to dwell on the reality of their own mortality. They are expertly conditioned to manage the chaos and tragedies that befall the public they serve. Yet, they are seldom prepared for their own fragility when confronted by the darkness they fight. With her service ended too soon, it is a struggle not to question the timing of fate. The intention is not to focus on the grim details surrounding her final moments. Instead, the focus remains on the lessons extracted from her time as a guardian of the city. While many knew her more intimately, her presence left a lasting impression on the entire department. Records suggest Payne viewed her entry into the Shreveport force as a divine mandate to serve. She carried the weight of the Silver Shield with an almost eerie level of professional dedication. Her identity became inseparable from the dark blue uniform of the local police department. A supervisor was so struck by her performance that he documented his observations for the record. Those archived notes provide a chillingly clear window into her final professional months. Personnel files indicate Payne bypassed the typical learning curve, operating with the efficiency of a veteran. Her documentation was described as phenomenal, showing a mind attuned to every minute detail. On the asphalt, her command of traffic stops appeared instinctive, as if born to the sirens. She possessed a rare psychological edge, masking her exhaustion with an unsettling level of focus. The final entry in her file reflects a profound sense of pride and a deeper loss. Last Thursday, the investigation into her legacy led to a meeting with Letha and her family. Despite the crushing weight of loss, there was a visible, iron-willed resolve to endure. Beside her stood Aubrey, Payne's daughter, left to navigate a world without her mother's shadow. Amidst the mourning, the family leaned on Pastor Reed, momentarily breaking the tension with a laugh. A memory surfaced a story Chhateri told about the friction between her and an anonymous training officer. The details were kept vague to shield those still serving within the department's ranks. In the interest of professional discretion, the specific names involved remained strictly confidential. Payne had reportedly grown weary of a partner's chatter, planning to assert her dominance very soon. It was a brief moment of professional friction, now frozen in time by her sudden absence. These fragments of memory serve as the only remaining evidence of a life cut prematurely short. In Aubrey, the physical evidence of Payne's life continues, a living legacy to be nurtured. The child stands as a testament to a mother's influence, even when that influence is severed. For the force, the psychological toll of a fallen peer remains immeasurable and heavy. No eulogy can dampen the sharp sting of the void she left behind in the precinct. Even a full forensic investigation yields no answers to why she was taken so early. The department is now forced to reconcile her death with the requirements of their sworn oath. That oath demands a stoic, courageous, calm, even when faced with the absolute worst of humanity. It requires a calculated self-restraint and a constant, vigilant focus on the protection of others. The duty now shifts from patrol to the long-term support of the family Payne left behind. It has been made clear to Letha on several occasions that the department is now family. The blue line has effectively blurred, merging the force's identity with her own family. In the heat of the moment, the spiritual convictions of the survivors began to manifest. They spoke of a higher power as the ultimate arbiter of their pain and path. This belief served as a psychological anchor, providing a sense of hope in a bleak landscape. It was the only source of stability they could find in the aftermath of tragedy. To the grieving, this faith was described as an immovable rock in a shifting sea. The repetition of these affirmations seemed to provide a rhythmic defense against the encroaching darkness. In the face of an existential void, the identity of their creator became their reality. They clung to the idea of joy and hope for a future that felt unreachable. The metaphor of the stone foundation was invoked once again to signal their enduring strength. It was a powerful reclamation of their psychological footing amidst the ongoing chaos. The declarations grew more intense, a vocalization of the internal battle against total despair. In the silence that followed, the name of the divine was the only sound left. To them, this singular entity represented the totality of their existence and their recovery. Everything they had lost was placed in those final, whispered words of absolute devotion. She repeatedly affirmed that he was her entire world, a mantra of total devotion. The words seemed to linger within the confines of that quiet room. Under the heavy scrutiny of the courtroom, she maintained that he was her absolute priority. Her existence appeared entirely tethered to his, a cycle of complete emotional surrender. It was a psychological loop, a constant reassertion of his dominance over her life. A rhythmic, almost hypnotic invocation of the divine filled the silence of the space. Ultimately, she claimed to place her entire destiny in the hands of a higher power. The community felt a profound obligation to stand in solidarity with those who serve. Thick crowds gathered along the pavement, a somber tribute to Officer Payne as her final journey began. There was a haunting beauty in the way the city united to carry the weight of a grieving family. The 3-mile motorcade served as a final patrol through the very neighborhoods she had vowed to defend. Such a display of public grief proved that, in times of tragedy, the community acts as a protective shield. In this region, the loss of a loved one triggers a collective and powerful local response. Mourners arrived from far beyond the parish lines, crossing regional divides to pour out their collective sympathy. They stood in silent witness, offering a final, solemn salute to a life cut short. There was a desperate hope that this sacrifice might finally silence the gunfire, even as her comrades performed the final rites. A lasting monument was eventually erected, financed solely through the small contributions of the citizens she protected. Her likeness stands cast in bronze, marked by her shield number, beside a bench where strangers still linger in reflection. Each 9th of January, a vigil forms at the site, a recurring ritual of remembrance for the department. Little Aubrey was only 2 years old when the violence erupted. Her mother had carried the shield for just 54 days. The escape was planned, the deposit paid, the new keys waiting. She was a mere 6 days away from freedom. Her mother spoke of a hollow plea to the heavens for her daughter's return, meeting only with an absolute silence. The wreckage of this case exposes a chilling truth. The architecture of control was visible long before the end. It was a psychological prison built of forced solitude and paranoid charges, fueled by a man who couldn't endure her independence. These red flags were hiding in plain sight, obvious to anyone trained to recognize the anatomy of obsession. Officer Chhateri Elise Payne, shield number 1588, was at the very threshold of a new life. Her shift has ended. The watch is now taken up by others as she enters eternal rest. She was entitled to that future, to those final 6 days that were cruelly stolen from her. If this narrative leaves a mark, pass it on. Awareness of these lethal cycles is our only defense. Deciphering the psychology behind the pattern is how we eventually safeguard the vulnerable. The investigation continues in our next chapter. The story of Officer Chhateri Payne is more than a tragic case file. It is a searing reminder that the most dangerous battlefields aren't always the city streets sometimes. They are the hallways of our own homes. Even with a badge on her chest and a shield in her hand, Chhateri was vulnerable to a predator who wore the mask of a partner. Control is a slow-growing poison. It often begins with a tracked location, a jealous text, or the subtle isolation of a loved one from their family. But the most lethal moment in any cycle of abuse is the moment of departure. Chhateri was just 6 days away from freedom. Her deposit was paid, her keys were waiting. That threshold of independence was exactly where a partner's obsession turned into a calculated execution. We must learn to recognize the red flags before they become a headline. True love does not require a GPS. Devotion does not demand a digital leash. If someone you know is planning their exit, stand as their silent shield. Awareness is our only defense against these quiet cycles of violence. Let Chhateri's sacrifice remind us that while the watch has ended for Officer 1588, our duty to protect the vulnerable and ourselves must never sleep.